Have you got a stash of unfinished paintings or drawings? I suppose everybody that has a hobby has a stash of unfinished projects. In this video, we're going to tackle 3 paintings I left unfinished. So we have some dodgy looking rhubarb, a still life of some fruit, and a nearly finished dog, which probably got done in gouache, I think. I'm going to use my desk easel today. I feel like sitting down for this. And since I'm going to prop up my phone on the easel, it'll be at the same angle as the painting, so that should help me with perspective. We're starting things off with this still life. I took the reference photo. I took it at the beginning of March 2022, so just 4 years ago. It was when I was doing an art club with some friends who were interested in getting some art tips from me. They were quite young and impressionable, and it was at the height of my artistic productivity during lockdown. I don't remember if I rearranged the fruit, but if I did, then I definitely need some help with composition, the way things are arranged. So, looking at my reference and looking at the painting itself, I've made some mistakes that are quite clear. I've added white to the highlights here on the apples, which was a mistake. It should be a lighter version of the colour of the apple. And these shadows, I've used blue rather than black, which is good, but I'm not convinced that that's the right colour to be using. I think the shadows are too long and they're definitely too dark. Everything's a bit unfinished. It all needs a bit more rendering. I added these bits yesterday, but that's as far as I got. And I really like these little details. I'm going to try not to use any black going forward if I can help it. And yeah, let's see how I get on. I haven't got a huge amount of experience with still life paintings and drawings. Sometimes I draw what's around me, but that's not the same as having an arrangement of inanimate objects arranged specifically to help you practice. I do like looking at still life paintings in galleries and books. Paul Cézanne's are my favourite so far. I love the brushwork, the vivid colours, the texture, everything about them really. Don't you feel like you could just pick up one of these pieces of fruit and it would just be the juiciest, tastiest thing ever? Anyway, we're going in with some midtones for the grapes, and I seem to have chosen to simplify the grapes a bit rather than painting them exactly as I saw them, which I think was a good decision. It looks much better than one big grapey mass. I think there's a lemon at the back there. It's hardly visible in the reference, but I really wanted to include it. Getting these apples right was quite difficult, especially the one in the foreground. I think it's because it's quite a uniform colour compared to the one in the background. Trying to make it seem like an apple and not just another red blob was quite challenging, but the one at the back is a bit easier. I struggled a bit with the cast shadows underneath the fruits, and I go over them with the same colour that I'm using on the board. I changed the colour of the background. The board that the fruit is on is kind of orangey yellow, and the blue is kind of its complement, and I think they look much better together than with the purple. I tried to add some different tints of blue as the paint approaches the top of the painting to give the illusion that the light source is coming from above. As usual, it's now just a case of going back and forth, trying to darken the shadows and lighten the highlights, and just going back and forth to try and get these colours right, or as close to right as I can. But I'm trying to use that painterly kind of effect still, rather than going in and smoothing everything out. I also tried something out with a sponge to add some texture to the board and bring the background colour into the foreground. It's a bit weird, but I like it. I felt a lot less confident about this part, adding the shadows in, making them a bit darker, and then putting them between the fruits as well. It felt quite risky because I didn't want to mess up all the nice colours I'd done already. The highlights really made everything pop though. Putting those in made a big difference to the outcome and makes everything look a lot more lively, a lot more shiny, and I think it looks good in the end. When you compare the before and after, I think I've made a vast improvement to this painting. It looks more finished than before. Next, we've got this rhubarb. I'm not sure which direction it goes in. The reference is this way round, if I found the right reference, that is. I think I'm going to paint it landscape though. I'm not sure about this background. I think it merges with the rhubarb a bit too much, but I think I've got the shapes down. Okay, let's see how we get on. I'm not 100% sure what my thinking was with this painting. I don't particularly like the reference photo or the crop that I've chosen, but I started this painting, looks like, back in May 2021, so I'm going to finish it. It's good practice anyway. This time I'm painting over the background first. Red on red was just a bit too distracting. I add a couple of shades of green to try to make it more interesting, and then I move on to adding some yellowy greeny tones into the rhubarb. I zoom into my reference so I can get a better idea of what I'm working on and where. Doing the leaves was quite satisfying, but the opacity of the paint was letting me down a bit. It might have helped with the overall effect, but it wasn't what I was trying to do. Now for these veins. I didn't really know what I was doing with the veins. They stood out too much, so I painted over them with some yellow. And then I go back and forth the darkest shadows and the lightest lights. I make a mistake with the shade of pink I use, so I go back over it with a less startling shade of pink. And I keep blending and adding more paint until things start to look more like rhubarb. Removing the tape was tricky because it's been glued on for so long. But there's nothing more satisfying than a nice crisp white border around a painting to make it look more finished. And here's the finished painting. Signing it was a little tricky. The paint didn't flow as smoothly as I wanted it to, and when I added water it just made it too runny, so I've yet to get the hang of signing a painting with acrylic paint. Overall, I think it's a blend between realism and impressionism, and it's not a great representation of either in my opinion. So last but not least, we've got this dog portrait. I think it's got a pretty good base. I like the different shades I've got in the black coat. It gives it a bit more life. The face though definitely needs some work, and the paws at the bottom here, and the transition between the black fur and the, in this case, orangey coloured fur. I'm not sure what I'm going to do about where he's sitting, but he definitely needs a background and he needs something to sit on for sure. So today I've got gouache, and I'm going to be using these as I'm pretty sure that that's what I used originally for the portrait. Let's see how we get on. I was hoping to start my colour mixing with the burnt sienna, but it's dried up. So instead, I'm going to mix my own version of brown, with as close to the primary colours as I can see. In this gouache set, I'm using Brilliant Red, Blue Lake and Lemon Yellow as my primaries. Reeves are a beginner paint brand. I got this in my art kit at secondary school when I took art for GCSE. So this is before their rebrand. Their products look quite different now, but they still have these colour names. But if I wanted to repurchase these, even though I could, I can't buy them individually. I'd have to buy a whole new set. I'm actually quite impressed that these paints have lasted about 18 years, and I bet that if I could be bothered, I could open up the burnt sienna tube and reactivate it with water. So as you can probably tell, my reference photo has been heavily edited. I think I used Prisma's app to get this stylised version, and I've lost the original. So my only choice is to press on with these brightened versions of the natural colours. Gouache, if you haven't used it, is somewhere between acrylic and watercolour, so I'm finding it tricky to get used to. Working out how much water to add and when to apply it straight from the palette without water is proving a little challenging. I think I'm making some headway on the head though. Toning down that cartoonish smile has made a difference. I'm not sure what the dark shapes on the nose are exactly, but I try to get them to not stand out too much while still giving the nose some shape. Putting the background in. Now unfortunately the gouache had dried up, so it was behaving more like watercolour than acrylic. I could have got out more paint from the tubes, but I kept hoping the paint would activate enough so it would behave more like gouache or acrylic, and eventually I was just so far into it that I decided to just keep going with it. But the white gouache was still wet, and that helped with the highlights. It was applying quite a bit thicker. I'm trying to get closer and closer to the reference, so I simplified the dog's forehead and nose so that it was more opaque and less shaded. Now he's looking a bit like an Austrian dictator, which was a bit of a mistake, but I feel like overall, in the end, it looks better than it did at the start. And here's all 3 paintings. Let me know which you like best. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.